Chapter 12, The Grand Canyon State. The morning I crossed the Arizona state line was a cause for celebration. It's hard to explain, but there was a quick and sudden change both in the atmosphere and my mood. One of my first evenings in Arizona, I got to experience an unlikely encounter with somebody I had a lot more in common with than I would have thought when we first met. I was just about to get a motel for the night when I heard a shout from behind me. "Hey man, what are you doing?" I turned around to see a man enthusiastically catching up with me. "I'm walking across the country," I responded. Elated, the man introduced himself. Felipe. Turns out he had started his own walk across America several years prior. Felipe went on the process differently than I did. In fact, he spent 2.5 years walking from California to Kansas. Along the way, he would stop in towns, find work to make money, and live there for a while until he felt it was time to keep moving. He had a change of plans come up when he got to Kansas, and actually ended up taking a ride down to the Dallas airport. From there, he flew out of the country to live in Mexico for a while. Felipe's approach to the walk inspired me. Mine was so goal-oriented, while he put a true focus on the journey itself. It didn't make me question how I was going about my walk, but it certainly gave me ideas for future adventures. Felipe actually ended up putting me up in a hotel for the night. It was probably the nicest hotel I stayed in my entire trip. We also got dinner together that evening. The most dangerous stretch of my trip was going through the canyon between Globe City and Superior, Arizona. It was easy to accept the risk I knew I'd be taking during the tamer parts of the walk, and especially before I'd ever left in the first place. But on this particular day, I was truly questioning if the walk was worth putting my life at the risk that I was. This was different terrain from what I'd been used to walking in, as the canyon walls hovered high above the two very narrow lanes of opposing traffic. These walls made it impossible for me to see what was up around the corners, and the lack of a decent shoulder left me at the mercy of drivers' attentiveness and reaction times. There was one particular corner on which the shoulder was overgrown with sharp and dense plants. There was no way to see around, and the sound of oncoming traffic was completely muffled. It was an outright gamble as to whether I should go out into the road or not. I suppose this was where I should have realized that this was absolutely not worth it, and that I should have gotten a ride through this part or taken an alternative route. The only issue was, I was kind of already in the middle of this, and the only way out was forward or back. I chose forward, taking a deep breath before beginning to push my stroller out into the lane. Whoosh! A BMW flew by as I quickly jutted backward. Shit was getting real. Without much other choice, I waited for the current stream of traffic to drive by before making a second attempt at pushing out into the road. Thankfully, not a single car was coming my way, giving me ample time to run around the corner and back into what little shoulder the road had to offer. After making it up an incline a few miles later, I took the opportunity to rest on the shoulder that had widened for a short distance. It was at this spot that I would have one of the most profound interactions I ever had with a stranger. It started off like many of my other encounters. A woman pulled over to ask if I was okay and if I needed a ride. I thanked her for the offer, letting her know that I was attempting to walk across the country. Her face very quickly went pale. Shocked, she asked me again what I was doing. Again, I told her I was walking across America. It turns out that her stepson had often talked about making his own trek across the country. Unfortunately, a few years prior, he had taken his own life. It was an absolute honor of mine for her to sign his name on the inside of my hat. I promised her that I would take her stepson with me the rest of the way to the ocean, his favorite place. We thanked each other again before I continued walking. At this point, I thought the worst of this dangerous stretch was over. I was wrong. I still had to go through Queen Creek Tunnel, cross a second bridge, and walk on more highway to get down into the next city. I tried to wait for a break in traffic to run through the tunnel, but even after no cars were in sight and I started working my way through, traffic began to pick up once again before I was out the other side. Even with my headlamp on, drivers seemed to have trouble seeing me. They had 2 lanes to drive in, but many continued driving on the side I was on. I felt awful for obstructing traffic, and just as, if not more concerned for my own well-being. Nevertheless, I made it out of that area okay, and was able to find a beautiful spot to camp for the night, right by a large saguaro cactus. The rest of my time in Arizona was fairly uneventful, though it was hard to get through, both physically and mentally. Once I got toward the end of Arizona, I was over the walk. The physical and mental fatigue was beyond anything I had ever experienced. I was worn down, in pain, discouraged, and homesick. I wanted to quit, and the only thing keeping me from doing so was the simple fact of how ridiculous it would have been to give up with only a few hundred miles to go.